Happy Tuesday, everybody, and Wednesday if you're on that side of the world. Hope everybody had a good week. So today I'm going to start off about how to design a step-up board, and this question is specifically about Hawaii winter swell. Should the width change with the length, or can you stick to your normal performance thickness and width and just go longer? So you have your normal performance shortboard, and that arguably is your lowest volume board. You have alternative small wave boards that actually have a little bit more volume because they're wider and possibly thicker or have a flatter deck. So like when I build a quiver for somebody, their 6.0 or whatever it is their thinnest board, but it's not necessarily the narrowest board. As I start to get into step-ups, 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches longer, the board gets narrower. It's not by much, but it's a little bit narrower. Why? The narrowness helps with a couple things. It helps really handle the more power. The bigger the wave, the more power usually. And so with a narrower board, it's a little bit more sensitive, and it tends to not have quite as much planing area. 2 inches an extra length adds a little bit better paddle, but if you make it a touch narrower, it ends up being about the same planing area. But I make them a touch thicker too as I go longer. The reason for that is as you get in the bigger surf, the waves are usually moving faster and they're more difficult to catch. So as I go up the ladder, 6'2", 6'4", 6'5", boards are basically almost the same width, maybe a fraction narrower. 6'8", 6'10", quarter inch narrower, maybe, give or take a little bit. Even 3/8 in some cases. And about 7 foot is where that stops. But the board is beginning thicker too, so the board's increasing in volume. Around 7.2, 7.4, the boards start to come out in width, because it's if you don't, and the board gets longer. If you can imagine, once again, you can do this exercise. You imagine an 11-foot board being 18.5 inches wide. It's just not going to have any outline curve, and it's probably not going to catch waves that good. But it's so when you start coming to 7.2, 7.4, the boards start to come back out, and then they start to creep up over what your performance short board is. But all the time, your thickness has been creeping up, and that's for to create extra volume and to help you catch waves. The 8-foot board, somebody's riding a, say, 18 5/8 inch 6-foot board, and a 7-foot board would be maybe 18.5, 18 3/8 maybe, but 7.2, 7.4 is starting to creep back up to 18 5/8, and which is 18.68. And as you get up to around 8-foot board, you're starting to look at 19 inches wide, and a 9-foot board is 19.5 to 20 inches wide, and a 9.6 is 20.5 plus. And So, you start getting into 9.6s and the 10-foot boards, I think, for the guys are JoJo and Garrett and Jamie Sterling and a few other guys. The boards, JoJo's a little bit heavier. He's 180, maybe, 185. Jamie's 160. They're riding boards that are, in the 9.6 to 10-foot range, they're riding boards that are 21 inches plus. So, I hope that answers your question. And the tail widths for a board for Haleiwa, generally the tail widths, as the boards get longer, the tail and nose widths creep down a little bit quicker than the center. And tails aren't quite as narrow as they used to be, obviously because of the tri-fins, but because of the forefins. And you can run a little bit wider tail with a forefin. So, typical hot dog board width is maybe 15 inches, give or take a half inch, depending on the size of the rider. But they start to creep down, like your step-up board is maybe 14 1/4, and the next one up after that is 14, and so forth. So, I know that might have been a bit technical for some of you, but if you're thinking about getting a second board, a step up, you have to understand that the board maybe needs to be a fraction narrower, but a fraction thicker. And another question about foam. Is there a foam that doesn't yellow over time? Yes, EPS. On the EPS, boards with epoxy glassing, it's not the foam that yellows. Styrofoam stays white. It's the resin, and there's all kinds of different epoxies out there. And that was actually one of the problems we had when Clark Foam closed in December '05. Everybody was freaking and looking. We pretty much ran out of foam. Basically the next day, because everybody put their orders in and hoarded. And Gordon tried to honor as many of the orders as he could, but he ran out of foam pretty quick. And so I started trying to seek out styrofoam and epoxy resin, and Greg Lohr, who I've known Greg almost 45 years. He used to be a fellow GNS team rider. But he's been into epoxy boards, I don't know, 30, 40 years. And he's actually, he manufactures his own resin and sells it to quite a few board makers. But in the early days of the first 5-10 years, the epoxy resins were the culprit. They'd yellow. And we'd build stock boards for the shops the first year or two, and they're all psyched. But then a month or two later, we get, phone calls from the managers saying, "Hey, the boards are really turning yellow. Can you take them back?" And that kind of cooled the interest in EPS boards. It has nothing to do with the strength of the structure. It's just all cosmetic. But as time has gone by, there's been surfboard-specific epoxies developed, and now there's some very clear, you call them white or bright, but very clear epoxies, and they stay clear over time. The polyurethane foam would yellow a little bit over time. Some makers had a little bit brighter, whiter foam than others, but it's I'd say the primary culprit on foam yellowing is the polyurethane foam. What else have we got?
You want to check this one online question?
Can you cut channels anymore? Yeah, the question is, can you cut out channels on any model, or do certain models not benefit from having channels on the tail? Like for instance, the blade. We make it with a concave bottom, and I make it with a channel bottom. And the concave bottom, concave is fairly deep. It's almost 0.3 behind center, and it's got a little bit more rocker. The 4-channel board has slightly lower tail rocker, and it's got a very, very shallow concave through the middle, and then goes into a slight convex through the last third of the board. It's shallow is like, I say 0.1 or less, 0.12 or less, eighth of an inch or less. And my thoughts on that are is if the channels went off the tail, they add a little bit of extra curve so the board fits, but they also add a bit of hold too. Deeper the channels, the thinking is, the deeper the channels are, the more the board holds. But ultimately it becomes a little bit, I don't want to say stiffer, but a little bit tighter feel. You lean on the board and it draws a longer line. And I started making channels, I don't know, late 70s, and you just, six deep channels was kind of the go, but I made
Glass ones.
And glass ones. That's when the Sanders are still heroes in my mind, but that's when they were truly heroes. Having the sand, in the late 70s, early 80s is when the tri-fins came in, but even channel bottoms in the 70s. Twin fins, two glass on fins, and you had to work your way around the channels. And like I said, most of them were 6 channels in the back third. But there's belly channels and 4 shallow channels off the tail. And so, back in the day, we used to build some 8-channel and 10-channel boards, and I would soften the brake from rail to rail a little bit, and then add the channels in. And my thoughts once again is that off the channels which exit the board at about 3/8 of an inch, give or take a little bit deep, that adds as a partial rocker addition. So I can put channels on anything. I used to put them on eggs. I used to make 8-channel and 10-channel eggs. But yeah, if you're interested in channels, there's several types, but I can reconfigure the bottom of a board a little bit so the channels don't end up working against the bottom, and it all works as one comprehensive unit.
Your thoughts on Shiv?
The Shiv, I'm a big flat deck fan. I kind of always have, and in the early 80s, that's kind of where I made my reputation. I was like one of the few guys actually doing flat decks, especially back in the last 18 inches of the board. But the Shiv is basically the SD, same bottom as the SD, fairly heavy concave behind the wide point, and it stays fairly deep as it runs up towards the nose, and fairly deep as it runs towards the tail and hits 0. I don't like concaves off the tails of the board. I'm going to sidestep a little bit here, but I really feel that as you finish a turn, if you have a concave, you're not going to have continuity. At some point, the tail's going to skip or give a little bit or fight back a little bit. So I think if you look at most of my boards, they'll either be flat or have a slight V or slight convex off the tail. But the shiv is essentially the SD bottom and pretty much the SD rocker. I've pulled the tail in a little bit, the tail block, but I've given it a pretty flat deck, and it's still the flat. The 84 caught on. I mean, it was a given, and then the blade is. I've had the blade out for a couple of years now, and it's been gradually gaining acceptance, and people are really liking him. And now they're starting to become interested in the shiv and the hatchet and the 419 fish. Most fishes have a flatter deck, but the shiv's got a pretty flat deck, and you can ride a flat deck board roughly a quarter, 0.2 to 0.25 inches thinner. And because there's more volume carried out to the rail, you can drop the deck volume. And once again, the narrower the distance is, the smaller the distance between the top and the bottom of the board, the more flex you're going to get out of the board. Once again, if you imagine a 3-inch thick board versus a 1-inch thick board, the 1-inch board is going to be a bender, and the 3-inch thick board probably isn't going to flex much at all. So the shiv, it's got great flex, good paddle. It's got great speed, and it is slowly being discovered too. But I think as more and more people ride them or try them, they're going to continue to gain in popularity.
This guy is asking, how does torsion spring compare to XTR? Same foam.
Actually, yeah, the XTR foam and the torsion spring. Torsion spring is just a name that we've given to the extruded polystyrene, which is XPS or XTR.
XTR is a brand.
Yeah, XTR is a brand as well, but we're all using basically the same foam. It's an extruded polystyrene. Once again, the EPS foam starts as small beads, very small hard beads, and used to be they get put in the big block containers, and they would expand the beads and they would fuse together, and for many years they're kind of loosely fused, but and then they come out and they hot wire the blanks. But in the last 5, 7, 8 years, that Marco Foam is one company that has molds that are similar to the polyurethane molds, and the beads are getting more tightly fused. It's the smaller the container is, the more pressure, or the easier it is to put pressure on the foam as it's blowing. And so the adhesion on the beads has gotten better, but it's still it's called closed cell foam. It's kind of counterintuitive, but polyurethane foam is open cell, but that's because I don't know how to describe it. It's the foam. The foam and the polyurethane is all like
cells.
Cells, yeah. And the foam and polystyrene is beads, and but the higher the fusion, the hotter the heat and the higher the pressure, the better the fusion is. The extruded styrofoam starts with beads with a different chemical in it, and they actually melt the beads and then they extrude them, so the foam is more like vertical columns, and the early EPS was really a sponge. I remember on a surf trip once, I got a ding, and the surf was so good I stayed out for another hour or two, and I came in and my board was about 2 pounds heavier, and I had to let it sit for several days to drain before I could put some resin or tape on it. But the extruded styrofoam comes out in vertical columns, and it is pretty much water. I say waterproof, but very water resistant. And But the extruded styrofoam, and this is a big one for those of you that get torsion springs. The extruded styrofoam needs to be vented. So when the board's glassed, as the board heats, as the extruded styrofoam heats up, it gives off a gas. And if board gets real hot, eventually it'll start to have little D-lamps here and there. And the fellow at XTR, who I've told the story many times. There was a guy from Peru that brought the first foam up, and we were oohed and awed. And it was. I discovered it was the same that Dow has been making for years, and they color code it blue. And he paid up and had Dow make a. I don't know if it was Dow, but he had the maker make a batch of white foam and brought it up here for us to try. And the problem is he couldn't afford to make, it's a big minimum, and he couldn't afford to pay for that. So it kind of went by the wayside for a little while. But Javier up at XTR, I guess he bought the technology, or he figured it out or something. But he soon learned that he had to put perforations on mainly the deck. It's pretty much the deck, isn't it, Pedro?
Yeah, mainly the deck. You stopped doing it on the bottom.
Yeah.
They're all zero.
Yeah, but the deck will have a series of holes, and they're small enough really so the water doesn't get in, but they're big enough for the gas to escape, and it's really solved a lot of the delamination problems we're having early on with the XPS foam. And sometimes when customers get the boards, they say, "Well, my board's defective. It's got all these little holes in it." And we have a disclaimer on our website, but those holes are necessary so the boards don't blow up. What else you got?
Oh, I lost my questions here. I'm trying to get.
I think somebody just asked the difference between E and S cloth. E cloth. E cloth is, and S cloth has been around for a while too. I read up on it the other day, but S cloth, I think the S stands for strength. The E cloth is your typical cloth that most surfboarders build. 4, 6, 8 ounce. Typical is 4. A typical shortboard glass job is a double 4 deck with a 4 bottom, and on the styrofoam, the torsion spring with glass is a little bit heavier. And then S cloth, we've been using it for over 20 years. The E cloth has got good give, good flex, because it's a more open fiber. Has a taller weave to it. It carries more resin, and the S cloth is very flat, a much tighter weave. So that it's not as flexible as the E cloth, but it is more dent resistant. So what I've done over the years is I've offered, and it's really not much more of an expense. The S cloth is about $10, $15, $20 a yard.
$5.
Oh, it's $5 a yard. See, I'm wrong. The S cloth is $5 a yard. So in your average short board, it's only like $10, $15 extra for a layer of S cloth and a layer of E cloth on the deck, and I think that's a great combo. I wouldn't use S cloth on the bottom because once again it's more for pressure denting and less for shear strength. And I made some all S cloth boards years and years ago, and my boards are pretty thick, and I've only broken a few over all the years, but that board broke, and so I'd highly recommend an E cloth bottom and a E and a S combo deck. And what's the best? Another question I had is kind of related to what's the best way to reinforce the deck of my surfboard to prevent heel pushes through. Carbon, I think, or we can do an extra tail patch of regular cloth, but carbon's been kind of the go-to for quite a few years now. Those are the little black rectangles on each side of the tail of the surfboard. Yeah, but that's in the early days, especially when the boards were getting a lot thinner, and we didn't have the thin blanks yet, but we're using thicker polyurethane to have to hand shape, boards 2 1/4 inches thick instead of 2 5/8 or whatever. And as you get deeper in the polyurethane foam, it gets weaker. Polystyrene foam has basically the same density all the way through, but the polyurethane foam gets increasingly
EPS too.
Denser towards the surface, I guess. The EPS to some point too.
I saw a guy asking you, he rides 26 liters for his shortboard, and he wants to know what volume should he get on a twin fin. I guess daily board, daily driver, right?
Volume, or how small he can go, or?
He said he rides 26 liters on his shorty.
All right. Well, I'm guessing you weigh in the 150 to 160 pound range, but I think as you go down and you get the fish shapes, the a lot more area, but a lot more of an even thickness flow, and they're for small waves. You have less. You don't have less. You have shorter length, but you have maybe a little bit more planing area than you do on your performance shortboard. And I'm thinking most fishes people go 4 to 6 inches shorter. So if you're riding a 5'10" or 5'9", that's 26 liters. You can easily ride a 5'5" or a 5'4". Not so much a straight twin fin with a curvier outline, narrower nose and tail, but the more traditional kind of fish templates, you can go. I think most people go at least 4 inches shorter, and a lot of people go 6 inches shorter with a little bit more volume. A couple liters more, a couple 3 liters more.
What about carbon fiber bottoms?
Well, yeah, that's carbon fiber is stiff. Stiff. We used to, a company called, it was a spin-off of a boat company up in Newport. They made some of the world's winningest racing yachts, and father-son team, and I guess the father surfed too, but they wanted to try making hollow carbon surfboards, and they're pretty tough. They would break, but they also rode quite differently, just because of the air between the top surface and the bottom surface. And I think, what about a carbon bottom? The carbon's stiff. If you're gonna put carbon on a board, I think if you here's kind of the contradiction. If you put a carbon band down the bottom, that will give it some strength, and it will help prevent the board from breaking, but it will stiffen the board. If you put it on the top, you put a carbon band on the top, all it does is make the top a little bit more rigid, and the bottom is probably more susceptible to buckling. I wouldn't build a board with a carbon bottom and an E or S cloth deck. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think, on a side note, right now, the black boards are, I guess, Italo and Gabrielle have been riding some black boards lately. And guess what? They get all the free boards they want. So it doesn't matter how long the boards last, and they probably don't really care because they're not paying for them if there's some flaws. And the black, an all black board or a large black surface will show any imperfections, and there are imperfections at every surfboard, and that's why they need to be QC'd. And but the more importantly is the black absorbs heat, and it's going to be problematic if you have black or any very dark color, for that matter, on the deck of the board. You're going to have your wax melting. You're going to get, eventually you will get delaminations. It'll show any imperfections. And I will do a blackboard reluctantly, and with the warning that you may face delams in the future. But
maybe it's got to be a resin tin.
Yeah, and even resin tints, I think, are more susceptible. I think any darker board, you know, a white board, clear board, is obviously going to absorb the least amount of heat, and the darker the shade of the color gets, the more heat it absorbs. And at some point, you know, the gases will expand and they'll start to push on the cloth from the inside. But back to the all carbon bottom, I would highly recommend not doing it. If you want an all carbon surface, you'll get the most out of it from the deck, I believe. But
what's your favorite model in your range?
My favorite model.
Get some lights. Yeah, it's too dark.
My favorite model, I don't know. I've my personal favorite model. I'm old and I'm big, so I'm not going to tell you what my personal favorite model is. But a couple of the most popular models that we have are, I think the Dwart is probably about the most popular model. It's.
I think you got a break on categories.
Yeah.
High performance, traveler, right? Mid-range,
yeah. So Pedro's making a point that it's there's favorite boards in each category. So in the alternative kind of fishy type designs, the Dwart hands down is probably the most popular. In terms of performance shortboards, I'd say right now the SD is, I think, just about the most. I think it's the most popular one. In step-up boards, we've got the Slayer, which is actually a step down, the Slayer 2, which is a step up, and it's a more balanced outline with a little bit more rocker than the Slayer. But the board I really like is the Blackbird, and I've made them under 6 feet long, and I've made them 9 feet long, and it's just I really like the balance of the proportions of the outline and the rocker and the bottoms. I change. The shorter boards I put a little bit more concave, and that splits into a double barrel V in the last third. But as I get into longer ones, like say 7/6 and longer, I feel that the bottom needs to have some rail-to-rail break, V or double barrel V. So I'll start flattening the center of the board out, and I'll start adding V into the back third of the board, and then around 8 foot long, I start giving I shape in a little bit of give in the middle of the board, kind of part release, part V, but it's very shallow, and the V in the back third starts to get deeper. And as I get into the 9/6 boards, I'm doing 0.15 to 0.2 break in the center of the board, and as much as a 1/4 inch break in the last third. So that's simply because the longer the board, usually the bigger the waves you're after, and the bigger the waves, the more power you have, and the more you need to disperse it. And as the boards get longer too, if they had concave bottom rail to rail, and as I said before, they start getting wider around 7.2, 7.4. So the wider the board gets, the more it's going to resist. It's going to want to stay flatter on the water, so that's a good reason to put a little bit of V or break in the boards too.
Suggestion for dwarf, thruster or quad for single waves OB?
You're talking to a complete dwarf, a complete four-fin convert here. I think every board works better in most conditions as a quad. There's some conditions where a tri-fin works better, or, if that's your style, if you want to do tighter, harder turns and arcs, tri-fin, or, if you're the quads are loose and they're very fast. You can't slam them, and I don't know if that makes sense. You can't slam them into turns because the fins are actually holding so well. They don't like to be pushed to that hard through turns, and that kind of leads me back to asymmetricals. I know there's some young shapers exploring asymmetricals, and they're young and they're they've experiencing a lot of these things for the first time, and they tend to exaggerate the lines and the curves and the asymmetry on the boards. Ryan Birch, great shaper. Ryan Birch, great shaper. Hats off. But I personally think there's a place for asymmetricals, but it's a much subtler program. The templates could be off a little bit. Rails can be off a little bit.
Fins.
But the fins, I'd really suggest working with your shaper on experimenting with your fins being offset, tri-fin or quad, and even the fins being a half inch, one fin further up than the other, and I've had several experiences where people have come back and they go, "Man, this board's magic. What is it?" And it took me a few boards to figure out what was going on, but I really think that, and there were some fin systems 10, 15 years ago, not many, a couple, but you could adjust, where the fins were, so you could play with that. But I'd say if you're interested in asymmetry, the first place to look is really the fins, because your stance, on your front side rail, your I don't know. Front side rail, you can't deliver as much power as you can on your back side, and that's one of the reasons.
Does torsion spring work on step up wakeboard as a step up?
On a wakeboard, yeah.
The torsion spring, like a step up, like a Blackbird. I guess he's talking about like
a surfboard or a wakeboard.
No, surfboard.
Torsion spring, well. Yeah, I saw that, and I think part of the problem is the length that the clear extruded polystyrene is available. Now, if you had enough money behind you, you could order a $500,000 batch of your own private white foam, and you can get it any length, but. The supplier that we have, what's the longest length they make? 7 foot or something like that?
7.2. I mean, you can order bigger, but that's going to be like a big batch, like I don't know.
$500,000 or something. Yeah, it's The problem is right now is the availability. And the longest boards we can make are about 7 foot, 7.2. So you can get a step-up board, and the extruded polystyrene would work great. I think you'd probably on our torsion springs, we don't really put a stringer in. We rely on more so in the Kevlar on the rails for strength. But if you did get a 7-foot or 7.2 step semi gun, you probably want to put a little bit of wood in the middle. Board, you might find the board being too bendy and bigger surf without it. What are the best conditions for a channel bottom? Are they as sensitive to wind as people say? I think I believe so. I mean, I've ridden channel bottoms on and off since the late 70s, and if it's smooth or very light wind, especially offshore, if you have a relatively smooth surface, they work great. But the bumpier the surface gets, they gather and redirect the energy, and they start to get a little bit harder to ride as the surface gets bumpier, and the question was, are they as sensitive? I think they are sensitive. I don't know what you mean by as, but the channel bottoms on the small wave boards are kind of for a little bit more hold and grip, like on the blade, and that carries over into bigger boards. And I remember my first experience on a channel bottom out of Cloudbreak in the late 80s. I blew my mind. It was like glassy, very light offshore. It was about a 6-8 foot wave, and my first bottom turn, I went, holy shit, because it was kind of easier to actually lay the board over on a rail, but then the bite and the drive it had out of the turn was amazing. And but I discovered that on the windier days it was a little bit tougher to handle. So what else we got?
There's a guy here. Where do you look for inspiration for new models? Will you do an egg like CI
mid-length?
Yeah.
I've been shaping for a long time, and I've prided myself in taking on just about any type of surfboard design. And how do I come up with a new design? Well, I'm not going to say necessity, but as the seasons go by, we identify gaps in our line list, and we arguably might have too many performance shortboards, but we might not have, and we're adding a couple of kind of in between a high performance board and a fish, like Clyde Beatty used to make rocket fishes, and those things were popular in the late 70s, early 80s. And a typical shortboard might have a 12 nose and 18 3/4 center and a 14 1/2 tail or something. But the rocket fishes are wider. And, I'm working on one called the 419 Go that is not as full of a template. And we've got a couple other models, the Miso, that is a fuller outline, but it's not as full as a fish. And the mid-length boards, I've got tons of experience with those, and they're popular again. And so mid-length is kind of a broad, has a wide range of designs that it should cover, but the trend is right now kind of eggy shapes, kind of a little bit fuller outlines, cruisier boards. And I've revisited the egg a bunch of times over the last 40 years, and so we have a new and improved egg that we're going to be offering soon. And the board has a little bit more rocker than the old eggs, especially in the tail, and the rails are a little bit leaner, and the bottoms are flattish in the center, and then they go into a double barrel V through the back third.
Got a good sequence of questions here. What's a good model for windy, punchy conditions? Something like something that can handle choppy water.
What's a good model for choppy water? I got a couple friends that live up the ranch, and I've been building them boards. One guy I've been building them with the eave bottom, which is Morris Cole's reverse V, which he made real popular. He says it was a mistake. The board came off the machine, and he shaped it backwards. Morris is a good storyteller, but the famous shot of Tom Curran at Haleiwa on a 7-4, I think. That was an eve, and so I have these guys up at the ranch. One guy gets a traditional eve that's got maybe 3/16 Z in the nose, and maybe the V is the deepest ahead of center, a quarter inch, maybe even 3/8 of an inch deep. And then as it goes into the back third, it starts to flatten out, and off the last 6, 8, 10 inches, it's dead flat, but with a little bit more bend. And those boards, they seem to work. They work in all conditions, but the guys are liking them up. The ranch is known for its perfect surf, but it's also known to be pretty windy from time to time. And so I would, back to your original question, I'd say, concave the deeper the concave, the more it's going to, the water's going to stay under the board, and the more sensitive it's going to get. And real heavy concaves, I don't think work that good in really bumpy surf. I think as you get into bumpier surf, you might want to explore a little bit more V, And
what model do you think is best in our range?
In our range, well, I've taken the Blackbird, and we're mainly doing this on a custom basis, but this guy just recently ordered another Eve, and it was based off the Terminator, which is like a step up, but a step up for a bigger guy. It was pretty popular 10, 15 years ago. And Ben, another good friend that lives up there, he's been getting some Blackbirds with kind of a forward V vibe, and now he's starting to switch his whole quiver over. So it's, once again, I can do it. I can pretty much shape anything. I had a guy the other day that wanted to order an 8 foot 4-inch 84 board. He's a big guy, and but he said the longest he could find on the website was 7 foot. And I said, dude, I can make you a 12-foot long 84 if you want. But yeah, the beauty of foam is as long as you have enough foam there, you can make just about anything. And Jojo Roper, yes, we're gonna bring the Eve back.
What's the best board for scripts?
Oh, the best board for scripts. It's the one you have the most fun on. Scripts is like my home. It's like the first place I surfed practically. It's got a lot of different modes. I always found scripts to be best on a 3.5 to 4.5 foot tide, and occasionally on a ground swell, depending on the angle. You can have
some days south wind,
south wind, which is offshore there, and a northwest swell. So I remember getting my first great barrel out of scripts, but. Yeah, back to my first response is the board you have the most fun on, and that's true of a lot of spots, really. I've this last year I've had several of Wind and Seas, La Jolla's younger, hotter surfers ride their father's Moby fish and they freak, and so they've ordered them for themselves. They go, well, do you want it narrower or do you want it thinner? They go, no, I want it just like my dad's, and they've been riding him out of Dunamere, which
Tristan.
is Tristan Soloway, and
ripping shit at that thing.
Yeah,
It does off the lip, hit the lip to the 7-0.
Yeah. So for scripts, it depends on your ability. And I think, I've said this time and time again, but I think people are too much in a hurry to get on a shorter board. They really haven't developed the fundamentals yet. A little bit bigger board will help you catch waves. You'll learn to do your turns a little bit quicker. You can't go from a beginner to a guy that's busting big airs overnight. Surfing's I think it's one of the hardest, art or sport, whatever you want to call it, to master. And there's a lot of guys that just don't have the time to surf every day. And I think to improve, you need to surf at least 3 times a week. You might make some improvement, but to really, if you're on a mission to improve your skills, you need to surf 3, 4, 5 times a week. So, if you're a good surfer and you're writing scripts, SD or, for that matter, almost any of our performance shortboards, I think, to be realistic, the most of the time the surf's kind of small around here, and you're probably better off with, a 419 fish or, one of the flat deck boards but a little bit wider. And then the boys at my shop in La Jolla, rest in peace, they got into the not so Moby fishes, which are the Moby fish is so popular. It was originally an 8-foot board, and then it started I built an 11-foot one for myself. Started building them down close to 7 foot, and then people said, well, can I get one 6'6"? And so I've called them, I'm calling them Moby fish. Anything under 7 foot is the not so Moby fish. But the boys at the board house were loving them down at Scripps. And in the very small days, a longboard or a mini cruiser. But no, get her out of here. That's my wonderful baby pit bull. And Karen, you got to get her out of here because she's going to keep. Well, can you please get her out of here? Thank you. Is she out?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. TSG was my favorite shaper. Terry Goldsmith. He's the all-time guy. He used to, in the 70s, he used to make TSG surfboards. And he worked for GNS too for quite a few years. And he worked for me for quite a few years. He was really good at making like eggs and the Wayne Lynch series. We kind of did an egg shape. Wayne was so not into it, but I said, Wayne, there's people that still worship you from evolution. And so we talked him into making some eggs and some shorter, like mid-7 foot length, kind of 14.5-inch nose, 21.5 middle, and 14.5, 15-inch tails. And Terry's a great shaper. He retired early, and he's still healthy and happy, and
Hawaii.
And he's moved to Hawaii.
When I get a custom board, what fish model I should get 6'8"?
Well, I was just talking about that, the not so Moby fish.
Yeah.
I've been surprised at how popular they've been, all the way down to like 6 foot or even 5'10". And if you compare the not so Moby fish to like a regular fish 19, the nose isn't as wide. The tail is approximately the same, but the nose is a little bit narrower. And not so Moby fish, it's a good one. time for one or so more. Does Hoy still work for me? Yes, Hoy is a legend. Hoy is an absolute freaking legend. He's
best guy to work with.
He's so easy to work with. He is so talented as a shaper. In the early days of GNS, I was shaping my own boards, but I liked Hoy's shape so much. I'd order boards from, I'd order a few from Skip now and then, but the only other shaper I really ordered boards from on a regular basis for a while was Hoy. And I still have a picture of myself. My family moved to Hawaii in 71, but I still have a picture of myself standing in the backyard with a Hoy. I'm a big guy, so the 6'8" was like a hot dog board for me, and then a 7'4" was a step up. But I had a picture of me with each arm, a board in each arm.
You got to wrap up.
Yeah, I got a. Can I have a free surfboard? Yeah, sure. You have no idea how many free surfboards I've made. Anyways, time's gone by pretty quick. I got to sign off. But all of you, please stay safe and healthy. And I hope to be with you next week. So take care.